Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our Concepts Edition, episode 146. I am Devin Bedoni of Lichen Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing and Arda. And today's quote is, "Rules are made to be changed, not broken," from Miguel Pena. He is our CTO. And we were hanging out, and he was like, "I hate when people say rules are meant to be broken." He was like, "No, change the rule. Don't break it. Just if it needs to be changed, change it." Which I thought got back to like, without standards, there's no improvement.
Yeah, it really it just drives home the point that when he visited the shop with you guys, we were talking about our tool organization system, and I was kind of like going through all the different ways that like traditional systems can break and like the way that people break those rules versus updating the rules to continue to make it to function given the constraints that you're working with. And those are two, very different approaches.
A world apart. I mean, it really is, because one results in like a better system and the other results in no system at all.
Or several overlapping systems.
The worst case scenario.
Yeah, some people understand one system, some people understand the other. It's not a great way.
Yeah. So what's your week been like? What have you been thinking about?
Let's see. What's my week been like? I don't know. Things have been a little bit not hair on fire. Things are like oddly stable, but it's disorienting to me a little bit.
Keep reaching up, feeling like, why is my head so cool?
Yeah. Not that to say everything's been perfect. We've had some rushes. We've definitely been working on stuff, and we've had some crunches here and there. But personally, like my personal plate has been not as much urgency as usual. So
that's
I'm
awesome.
kind of,
wow.
It is cool. Like I'm realizing now I can start to focus on sales potentially. Can start to work on rolling out a QMS system that's real instead of pretend or non-existent. But it's also very disorienting because I'm not used to figuring out how to integrate those into my daily workflow. But it's good. It's been good overall. In terms of like podcast fodder, I have a few things in the notes, nothing like super compelling, but one thing was, after discussing with you kind of using chat, I started working on getting ChatGPT to help us write the QMS and lay out kind of that roadmap. Yeah. Which has been really cool, also frustrating. Like maybe I'm just not expert at using it, but I'm definitely finding using ChatGPT like requires a lot of finesse to get it to produce something usable when you're trying to do something complex. And what I keep finding is like in the QMS, and that's quality management system for anybody who's not deep into machine shop land, it'll either like provide really amazing levels of detail for like a small piece, or if you're trying to get it to write something broad, it tends to gloss over a lot of stuff without sort of recognizing that it's doing that.
Interesting.
Which was curious to me. So I kept kind of being like, having to like ask it to do one thing and then be like, okay, now do this for everything else. And then everything else would come out crappy and broad and like, basically non-usable. And I'd be like, okay, go back, do what you did for that one to this one, just this one, and kind of like parsing it out. But one really interesting part, which was a suggestion from you, and I'm sure many people are aware of this technique, but I'll just share it, was to ask chat to ask me what it needed to know in order to do what I had asked it to do. And that just that process itself of answering all those questions, which probably was like 3 or 4 hours of work.
Yeah.
That in itself, I think, got me pretty close to the point where I was like, okay, at this point, I think I could just write this on my own and have a pretty good idea of like what's coming out the other side, what questions I need to answer.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I might do most of the writing on my own.
Yeah.
Just use what chat produced as kind of like a framework.
Yeah. It's funny. Most of my exploits with ChatGPT, and yeah, I found the training process was labor intensive, but for me made the product much more usable. But for the most part, like, I'm not sure I've published anything that ChatGPT has written, but it sort of speeds me through the first 80% of being like, okay, what should this, like, what, I mean, not a QMS, but like, what does a QMS look like, right? What are the, yeah, I should have a section on this. Oh, that one is trash. It's missing this, and this. But really got me thinking. And I think it's a great example. Something that's been on my mind quite a bit this past week is just reducing the amount of stuff I do that has like no leverage in a funny way. Like, like if it, I don't know, I find myself like writing social media posts, for example, and that has leverage in the sense that, you know, thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people will see it, but it doesn't have leverage in terms of like, what is the process for creating social media? And I think sometimes I under index on systemizing those things because I'm eager to like see if it's a good process, I guess. So it's like, well, let's just muscle through it. But at some point you have to go like, okay, now let's define it. Let's make it repeatable. So yeah, I think then investing in getting ChatGPT to be effective enough has been worthwhile for me.
Yeah, I'm definitely not like writing it off, but that's kind of been my experience with every time I've used it, is like, if I want to just like have usable thing come out the other side, it's still a very involved process.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. How about you?
That makes sense. On chat or?
No, just
more broadly.
In general, what are you thinking about?
I mean, definitely just been busier than I've ever been in my whole life.
You keep saying that every week, so.
Yeah. No, it's getting worse, not better. But I'm taking steps to make it better. And there's sort of a forcing function. We're having a kid, and so there's a hard deadline. Like, that's just what's gonna happen. And so just trying to get a bunch of stuff knocked out before that happens. I think it's definitely pushing me to become definitely making me grow. But there's some growing pains in there. So some of the things, let's see. One of the really interesting things lately to me, so we did an offsite, or we had the whole ARDA team in one place all of last week. That was really fun, very interesting. It's been very cool to work alongside, which I think I mentioned, alongside people who just have, you know, deep industry experience. Along with the rest of the team, like everyone's awesome in different ways. But that is like, me and Kyle definitely index hard on like action and just like doing stuff, testing it, getting in people's hands, seeing what's working, what's not working. And I think that has pros and also cons. And especially as you grow the cost of the team, like something that's been very notable working with them is it's much more methodical, and I think much more in line with a lot of the writings of Toyota. And not to say that what we do is not, like, I think the part that I do well is like go to the Gemba, see what it is, run experiments really fast. I don't think I do the 90% planning, 10% execution, even in that PDCA loop. Right. And I think I could add just a little bit of like, I don't know, the 5 questions keep coming to mind, right? Like, what is the target state? What is the current state? Can I rattle them off all 5? What is the next experiment we're going to run? What do we expect to see from that experiment? And then 5 is like, when can we go and observe those results?
Yeah.
And I think like the future state I'm good at. I think the documenting the current state, sometimes I'm like, I know what it is. Right?
Yeah, we got this. It's obvious.
Yeah.
It's so obvious.
Right. Yeah. And then like, I just don't do it methodically. And I think watching them, I think there's a very nice hybrid emerging on the team. So the latest was, I had the whole team set up a merch station for Arda in the shop.
Okay. Yeah.
And I wasn't sure, like, I don't know. It felt a little weird to ask people to stand in what is still a freezing cold shop and like enter t-shirts into our software. Like, I don't know. It's just, it seems a little basic. But it was, go to the Gemba, never fails. I don't know. It was huge. And within minutes, kind of cracked open a possible like really big feature that we're sort of exploring around like scanning UPCs for your data entry.
And what a UPC is?
A universal product code, I think. So most of the things that arrive that are in your shop have a barcode on them already.
Yeah. So UPCs are barcodes that are universal. So they're like, there's a centralized sort of library that stores them.
Yeah. And so theoretically, you should be able to scan a thing. It's like, here's what it is. Here are optional vendors. Here's an image of the thing. Here's the manufacturer. And then you just hit like add to Arda, and then it's done. And then also, and I kind of thought of you and the crew over there. Should also work in receiving as well, right? You scan it. It shows you, here's your Arda listing. And then you're like, yep, receive. And it would help kind of complete that life cycle.
Yeah.
Without having to know what's arriving.
Like end mills, for example, do they always have a UPC on them, or is it only for things?
I will let you know this evening.
Yeah. I wondered if it's only for things that are sort of like destined to arrive in like a consumer marketplace sort of scenario.
I don't know austere products don't have UPCs, but
sure.
I think more mature organizations tend to pay for UPC codes. We are going to discover the limits. There's 2 limits. One is, I'm very curious about the same thing. Like, I'm not sure MariTool has barcodes on them, right?
Yeah.
But it might be that like Goering and I don't know, Destiny, whatever, like some might. And so there's that limitation of like, probably not everything is going to have it. Secondly, there's also different databases to reference, right? So even if it has it and you're accessing the wrong database, then that won't work. Yeah. So I'm not, I don't think it's a complete solution. But if we could hit like 80, like if you could imagine if you could walk around the shop and just scan 80% of the stuff you have on the shelf, and then it would just build you a queue with most of the data. And then you just go through and be like, oh, we want to have 4 of those, 8 of those, 1 of those. I don't know. Anyway, that's the dream. We'll see. We'll see where we get.
Interesting. And like generate cards and entries straight from that information versus hand entering.
Again,
maybe.
We'll find out.
Who knows?
I'll report back. That's the theory. So like already we have like an Amazon tool where you can enter the URL or just search it directly and then hit import, and it'll just drag in the image, drag in like the case of 5, like the, what it breaks down to. Mm-hmm. It can bring in the price. It can, I mean, even if we can save you 80% of the data entry, I think could be really helpful, but it could also be one of those things where it sounds cool and then you go try it and you're like, okay, it's missing half the time. And so it's like, you don't reach for it. So we'll find out. But I think just broadly in building out and going through the process of testing that idea, it's been really cool to work with with Miguel and Denis to kind of be like, okay, what are the success criteria? You know, here are all the different UPC lookup tools. Here's what their APIs offer. Here's what their pricing is. And so now I think we should go with this one for these reasons, and kind of, just kind of lay that out up front, right? Instead of like halfway through building, you're like, oh shit, this one doesn't have a good API or whatever.
Yeah.
Not that that's necessarily the risk here, but just in general. That's been cool to see.
Yeah, I think with like the rapid iteration process, it can be really easy to go really far to one side and be like, we're just going to test. But actually going through sort of the A3 process, you could potentially rule out 10 of those tests and save yourself a whole lot of time.
Yeah, and it feels like you're sitting, like, why are we sitting in a seat instead of just like trying it, right? And I totally get that. And the other thing, that I meant to say in all of this is I think I sort of undervalue my time when it's just me in the room, right?
Right.
And I'm like, I'll just cat it up and see if it works or whatever. And it's like, okay, is this critical for the business? Like, should this displace the other things that you have on your plate? Like, do we want to reprioritize our list? There's just a lot of stuff I'm hopefully getting better at doing.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of parallels into something I had written down here, which is just thinking about, like, as we've watched our business grow and how things have changed. I'm noticing this interesting sort of paradox that, like, as you optimize to be able to do stuff faster and faster, paradoxically, often there is a lot more complexity in the system and the ability to sort of like shift gears from thing to thing outside of that very like narrowly defined flow becomes really hard. So the organization as a whole sort of becomes less nimble even as you're moving faster. If that makes sense.
Do you have a specific example that's made you think of that?
I guess I've been thinking about like as an organization grows, and like in our case, we went from, say, doing 50 part numbers per year, and maybe each part number we could make pretty quickly. But now we're at a position where we're, say, doing 400 part numbers a year, and each part number probably happens a little quicker still, but the complexity of the system as a whole, it is much more complex now than it was a few years ago. And when you attempt to vary from sort of the predefined workflows, everything kind of comes to a grinding halt, versus when it was more simple, you could kind of shift gears, change tack, be a bit more nimble. But the overall capability of the business to actually do things quickly was less. And it's just an interesting paradox that occurred to me recently.
Yeah, that is interesting. That reminds me of my brother, who does a lot of stuff in like aviation, sort of talking about the mission of an airplane, of a particular design for an airplane. And as you get more optimized for a particular mission, like your curve of performance gets narrower and taller. And so then you try to operate outside of that, and it's like terrible. Whereas some aircraft are sort of not going to be amazing at anything, but they can do a lot of things. And I wonder if it sort of fits in that scheme a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And it just kind of, it seemed like it paralleled in a little bit to the ARDA team growing, and you're having to integrate a larger number of skill sets. You're trying to tackle sort of more complex problems. The need for planning and structure is growing. But simultaneously you are putting out more product quicker, I think, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, better have doubled.
Or maybe better product quickly.
Yeah, I think both. Ideally.
Yeah, so just kind of a interesting little tidbit that was on my mind.
That's cool. Yeah.
And especially as we consider more growth and adding more people, adding more processes to our shop, that's something I'm sort of having to but take into account when I consider like not just the positive effects, but what are the negative effects of becoming more complex and offering more services as we go on. Right. Like it's not all going to be sunshine and roses. There are going to be downsides.
Yeah. That's interesting. Speaking of downsides, I took a little foray into ERP land, where, okay, so we have some customers for Arda who basically want to pass a card. Let's say, they're filling orders to customers for some laser cut and then welded component, right? Or in a machining operation, you might have like filling customer orders with a part that goes to the lathe, then to the mill, then maybe gets some welding done, and then is ready to ship. There's a desire to sort of capture that flow on the Kanban card, right? Mm-hmm. And so on the card, sort of display like, yes, when finished goods issues this Kanban, it is calling for this set of operations to happen in this order. And so when you look at the card at the mill, it's like, oh, this is headed to welding now, right? So I can take it over there.
So including like dependencies and pre-dependency, but yeah, get what you're saying.
This is so I was like, okay, is there like a broader way to think about Kanban instead of just like information leg and then a resupply leg, right? We're passing the Kanban saying we need more, and then here's more. And can we think about it instead as this like railroad track with default 2 stations, like a home base and the station, so you're carrying information on the train out, and then some materials get added on, and then it comes back, right? But then you could add in other stops and sort of say, well, it goes lathe, mill, welding, and these are each stops. I see that you've... And I was like, man, that would really unify a lot of stuff. And I had a long conversation with Miguel, who I appreciate his willingness to engage. And I was like, because he was basically saying, no, we should keep it as like these very simple things. And then there's a box that connects each node, and you can have as much stuff in the box as you want. And in the box would be things like, hey, how do you make this part, right? Inside this box, if we open the lid and look inside, we would have the lathe, the mill, and the welding department kind of in that box. And then your whole production network, and like your information network, is just a bunch of these nodes with connectors, which are Kanbans, right?
Sure.
And I was just like, yes, I get that, but that means that you need another sort of structure, like data structure on top of that, to sort of have a place for things to live, of like, what is that flow? What is the single step bomb at each step? Like, what materials get on the plane, on the train? Is there an SOP for that, and where does that live? And so I was trying to sort of unify it, and finally he drew this. So I sort of drew my network, right? Like, well, it passes information to here, they do this thing, then it passes. So could we just think of each of those as a step in this sort of train track analogy? And finally he just like drew a line next to the home base of like finished goods, right? Like, and he was like, from the perspective of that station that's calling for more product, they don't know, like they don't need to know anything beyond that. And I don't know what made it click for me. Like, the beauty of Kanban is, and we talk about this frequently, right? You only need local information. You don't need global information. And so now if we implemented that in Arda, we would just be like headed down the road of deep ERP, because then like, if I was like, hey, Devin, make a Kanban for this thing you need at this station. What's involved in that now is suddenly like, okay, now I need to go talk to like every part of the process and then try to document it. And then if someone improves some part of it, we need to make sure that gets back into the document, and we update the digital side. Anyway, so it was a huge, Like
Yeah,
I'm glad I sort of went down it, but it was just a dead end.
right. Yeah, the beauty of Kanban is that it's, effectively dependency agnostic, right?
Yeah.
The loop
Yeah.
doesn't care what's pulling from it or providing to it. It just has to flow. If the stuff runs out, it can't flow.
Yep.
The downside is or maybe it's not a downside. The analogy that I have in my head is that like Kanban flow systems are like watersheds kind of, and the water is always going to like flow in a predetermined channel or system of channels, and they will coalesce at some point into a river that flows to the sea kind of scenario.
The sea being the customer.
What's that?
The water being value. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like in each individual molecule of water doesn't care what molecule is before it or what molecule is behind it. Like it's just following the path. The challenge there, right, is that like if you want things to flow differently, you have to dig a new channel. And so I think historically speaking, Kanban works like amazingly well in systems that have very like reliably consistent flow systems, right? It's like this thing always goes from here to here, this thing, and then the subsequent thing always goes from here to here. And as soon as you're like, I want to have a scatter shot of stuff flowing in all different directions, you're like, well, this is a drainage, and water lands at the top of these mountains and
water
it flows down
downhill
through these channels. Yeah. And like, this is how it works. So that's just not going to function. And I think that is sort of the job shop challenge, right? Is redefining what is your water, what is flowing, and kind of what your pathways are. That was very rambly.
Like if you think about each material flowing,
I think the beauty is that like
whatever information, but let's say material, there's some point at which it becomes custom, right? Like when you combine in your shop, when you combine end mills and aluminum, the result is deeply custom. In other shops, when you combine end mills and aluminum inside of a milling station, it is standardized. And so you sort of, you do need to figure out at what point you need a pool, and you're only going to like pull from that pool when you know exactly what the customer wants. I think people often underestimate how much is standard. For example, end mills, right? You can treat
100%.
that as a one-off, and a lot of shops do. It's like, well, we basically buy custom tools for each job anyway. And that might be true, but it's often like 1 or 2 custom tools and the rest is standard library. Goldratt sort of talks about ERPs in a, the promise of the ERP is a global optimum with global data. And I think the promise of, or what Kanban delivers is a local optimum with local data. And it sort of reminds me of the quote, democracy is the worst form of government, but the only one that works, right? It's sort of like that. It's like you can poke holes in Kanban all day. It just so happens that companies that use pull are like way more profitable and have higher throughput. And R&D teams that use pull, double their throughput, right? And that's just not unusual. And so you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm wrong.
You're right. It sucks, but also it doesn't suck.
But also it works better.
Yeah. Interesting. That was cool. That's fun to think about.
Yeah. Oh, this was another really fun tidbit from the on-site is the idea of a process spectrum. And so you can map shops, like different processes are like deep custom all the way to like deep custom, no variability to high variability. Deep custom with low volume, high customization with, no customization, super high volume. And if you draw that line, the different behaviors at different points in the process and what pain points are, what kind of where the pricing tends to be, where the value tends to be. Is a very interesting, like you can take any kind of shop and stick it on that spectrum and kind of know a lot about, like deep custom tends to also be adding a lot of value, in the form of knowledge. Like how to do the thing, not just doing the thing. Whereas then you get into low customization, high volume, and you get more like crank it out, not adding much value. It's sort of like time and materials. Anyway.
Yeah. When in that exploration, were you finding that there's like sort of an even spectrum, or is it kind of like you hit these crux points where you transition from one to the next? And you kind of have a large grouping.
Question. I bet there are sort of dead spaces where it's hard to operate just a good business. We were looking at it under the... Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm guessing that as a business, it would probably be good to do that sort of interrogation, because you might find you're like working in a space that's just bad from a profit standpoint.
Yeah. And the way we were looking at it, he brought it up as a way to decide who like the best Arda customers are, right? And it's definitely up in that customization area where we really do very, very well. Because if you get into the like bottom right, high volume, low customization, you can kind of, though pull is still a great way to do it. Again, there's plenty of, the jury is in.
Sure.
It is easier to want to use a BOM and withdraw from a known quantity of inventory and sort of do more of a ERP push system. Right. It's like every single time we make 100,000 of these a year, and every single time they use one spring. And like, you know,
Yeah. Interesting. I had one thought kind of pertaining to, I think a little bit what Arda is sort of going towards right now, which Arda's not what made me think of this. What made me think of this was like looking at a tchotchke on my counter that I got for Christmas and realizing that it was something I was never going to use, but there was no feedback to the producer of that.
Interesting.
And so I just had this thought of like, imagine if all companies only got paid when your product was regularly used, how differently the incentives would be for what you produced. And obviously there are
Eliyahu Gold Rat. Yeah, totally.
There are markets where that's the case, right? Where if your stuff doesn't work and people don't use it, like there will be problems. But then there's a lot of like consumer goods, especially where like the incentive is really just to make the sale. It doesn't matter. I mean, like Temu, right, is a great example of that. The fact that it exists simply is a great example of that.
Yeah, point of sale incentives are pretty weird. Like I even think about that in the outdoor industry. There's a lot of weird things that they can say on a tag that are irrelevant when you're actually in the woods in freezing conditions, but it sounds cool. Like, right. And all they're going to actually see feedback from is whether or not it sells, not how happy people were. And like the internet and like reviews, etc., definitely augment that. But the reason I mentioned Gold Rat is I believe in inventory dollar days, the inventory is only considered, might be throughput dollar days or both. It's only off of your books as a department when it is sold to the end user, which not just pushed out to your distribution network, right? Like it's not in our warehouse. We shipped it to one of our partners, whatever, like wholesale distributors, right? And now it's their problem.
Right. So at least pushing that down like one step. Obviously this is not actionable, but it's interesting just as a thought experiment to think about like, and I guess maybe subscription models, sort of like Spotify does this, where it's like the artist get paid when you listen to the music.
Maybe a little.
Maybe, barely. But imagining if like that was universal across all products, that like The more something
Right.
got used and the happier were people with it, the more you would get paid. Like how differently
dream.
things would be driven. It'd be kind of wild. Also terrifying.
Yeah, yeah, and then you get into weird psychology stuff of like if you had to pay every time you wanted to use something, that would sort of
Yeah.
be one potential outcome of that concept, and then like psychologically you'd be annoyed every time you went to use it and it would diminish your
Absolutely.
experience. But it is interesting, like just weird incentives and the tchotchkes, it's kind of wild. It's like, oh, someone needed something to give away, and that was really the value and the itch that's being scratched, not
Right.
like, is the thing itself any good? It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can flip it on its head and be like, well, that product did provide value. It provided exactly the value that this person was trying to achieve with it.
Right. Yeah, we need some dumb thing to give away, and here it is, and it's at a price point that makes sense for us. Well, on that topic, I've been finding myself wondering, like, I think a lot of companies are very unaware of the things that they're paying employees to do in a funny way, because it just sort of fades in, like, I don't know, similar, just sort of a meta point of like seeing people sort of defend their existing practices. And a lot of this is with Arda, with like selling to people, and we jump on a demo and we explain it to them, and they'll just be like, yeah, but ordering only takes me like 3 hours. And it's like, okay, is that a good 3 hours? Or like, yeah, we have to go to the store, but it's pretty rare. Or and it's just I don't know. It's interesting to me that people, and I'm sure I do it too, but just becoming aware of waste, and not as a judgment, but just as like a state of being, and that it's like 80% of our day. And then not just being like sort of complacent about it, being like, yeah, what if we could just cut that all out? And obviously Arda's not the answer to all that 80%. It's just the context I've been seeing it in. But
yeah, totally. Right on. Well, I think that might be a good place to wrap it up for today. Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully the sound quality is better than it was. Let us know. We'd love to hear some feedback if this is still working out. We're trying a new recording platform. We're back on proper mics, but if there's anything that's not working, please reach out. You can find me at likenprecision.com on the internet, liken_MFG on Instagram, the pod at incremental CI on Instagram. Tag us with improvements, and we will repost them, hopefully.
Yep.
But love to see them.
And you can find me. Yeah. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com on the internet, and arda.cards on Instagram and arda.cards on the internet. And we have a Patreon if you want to check it out. And we'll be back next week.
Talk to you soon.